There is a strange habit we human beings have. We believe that life must be controlled, managed, pushed into shape like a sculptor forcing stone into a statue. From the moment we wake up, we are planning, worrying, calculating, trying to bend tomorrow into the image we carry in our minds. And because of this, most people live in constant tension, because reality refuses to obey them completely. Life slips through their fingers like water, and the tighter they grip, the more exhausted they become. But have you ever noticed something curious? The river does not force itself to flow. The clouds do not struggle to drift across the sky. The seasons do not panic about arriving on time, and yet everything happens perfectly in its own rhythm. The oak tree does not sit in anxiety wondering whether it will become tall enough. It simply grows. Effortlessly, naturally, quietly, and perhaps the tragedy of modern life is that we have forgotten this rhythm. We have become convinced that if we stop forcing things, everything will collapse. We think that without constant pressure, life will somehow fall apart. So we push relationships, we push careers, we push ourselves, trying desperately to make things happen before their season has arrived. But forcing life is like trying to pull a flower open before it blooms. You may succeed in tearing the petals apart, but you will never create the blossom. Real growth cannot be rushed. Real understanding cannot be manufactured, and love certainly cannot be forced. And you see, when you force things, what you are really saying is, I do not trust life. You are standing against the current, exhausting yourself, believing you know exactly how the universe should unfold. But life is infinitely more intelligent than the anxious little plans we make in our heads. And think of how often the moments that changed your life came unexpectedly. The friendship you never planned, the opportunity that appeared out of nowhere, the insight that arrived when you finally stopped searching for it. The more you examine life, the more you realize that the most beautiful things often emerge naturally, not through struggle, but through openness. And now this does not mean becoming passive or lazy. People misunderstand this completely. Letting life flow does not mean sitting in a corner doing nothing while waiting for miracles to arrive. No, the river flows actively, but it does not strain. There is a difference between action and forcing. One comes from harmony, the other from fear. And when a musician truly masters their instrument, they no longer force the music. The notes flow through them. When an athlete enters the zone, they stop overthinking every movement. The body simply knows. And when you are deeply present in life, actions arise naturally from the moment itself, not from desperate anxiety about controlling the future. But the mind hates this idea because the mind craves certainty. It wants guarantees. It wants to know exactly where everything is heading. And yet life has never offered such guarantees. Life is improvisation. It is a dance, not a military march. And imagine dancing with someone while trying to predict every step 5 minutes ahead. You would stumble constantly. The dance only works when you respond to the movement as it happens. In the same way, living beautifully requires responsiveness, not rigid control. And so much suffering comes from demanding that reality be different from what it is. We insist that people behave according to our expectations. We insist that success arrive according to our schedule. We insist that pain should never touch us. And in this endless argument with reality, we create misery. But the moment you stop fighting the present moment, something extraordinary happens. Energy that was wasted on resistance becomes available for awareness. You begin to notice life instead of battling it. You begin to hear the birds again, to feel the breeze, to appreciate simple existence itself. And strangely enough, when you stop forcing life, things often begin to move more smoothly. Because panic clouds intelligence, fear narrows perception, but calmness allows clarity. A still lake reflects the moon perfectly, while disturbed water reflects nothing clearly at all. And many people are afraid of letting go because they think control is what keeps them safe. But control is often an illusion. You cannot control the weather, the economy, other people's thoughts, or even many things within yourself. The heart beats on its own, hair grows without your command, dreams appear in sleep without your permission. Life has always been happening spontaneously, and the wise person begins to cooperate with this spontaneity instead of resisting it. They understand that there is an intelligence far deeper than conscious calculation, and so they move with life rather than against it. And sometimes this means allowing endings to happen instead of desperately clinging to what has already faded. Sometimes it means waiting patiently instead of chasing obsessively. Sometimes it means trusting silence instead of filling every empty space with noise and activity. And there is a tremendous freedom in realizing that you do not have to force yourself to become worthy of existence. The sun does not earn its right to shine. The birds do not justify their songs. Existence itself is enough. And perhaps that is the great secret. Life was never meant to be a problem to solve, but an experience to live. The more tightly you cling to outcomes, the more life slips away unnoticed. But when you relax your grip, when you stop demanding certainty from an uncertain world, you begin to discover a profound ease underneath everything. And not because life suddenly becomes perfect, but because you are no longer at war with it. And then, for the first time, you truly begin to flow. And there is something rather peculiar about the way human beings approach life. We are taught from childhood that if we want something, we must push harder, grip tighter, and refuse to let go. Effort becomes a kind of religion. Struggle becomes proof that we are serious. And so we move through life with clenched fists, trying to force reality into the shape we imagine it should take. Yet the strange thing is that life often seems to resist us most when we are trying hardest to control it. And you can see this everywhere. A person desperately tries to be liked, and in their desperation they become unnatural, stiff, anxious. Another person chases success with such obsession that they lose the very creativity and joy that might have brought success naturally. Someone tries to force love to stay alive long after its spirit has quietly faded, and the relationship becomes heavy with tension. The harder they push, the more everything slips away from them, and it is much like trying to smooth the surface of water with your hand. The more aggressively you move, the more disturbance you create, but when the hand becomes still, the water settles on its own. Life behaves in much the same way. There is a natural intelligence moving through things, a rhythm that cannot be bullied into obedience. And the trouble is that the mind is terrified of uncertainty. It believes that if it relaxes its grip for even a moment, chaos will take over. So people spend their lives trying to dominate every outcome. They plan endlessly, worry endlessly, calculate endlessly, as though existence itself were some machine that must constantly be managed. But this constant forcing creates friction within the soul. It disconnects people from spontaneity, from intuition, from the subtle flow of life that cannot be understood through rigid control. And think of sleep. The more desperately you try to fall asleep, the more awake you become. Sleep only arrives when effort disappears. Happiness often works the same way. People chase it frantically, convinced it exists somewhere in the future, hidden behind achievement or recognition. But the chase itself creates tension, and tension blocks the very peace they are seeking. Or consider how tightly people cling to certainty. They want guarantees before taking a step forward. They want reassurance that nothing painful will happen. Yet life has never operated that way. The river flows by adapting to every curve, every obstacle, every stone in its path. If the river tried to force itself into a straight line, it would lose its nature entirely. And there is an enormous difference between participating in life and trying to overpower it. Action is natural. Effort can be beautiful. But forcing comes from fear. It comes from the belief that existence cannot be trusted. And so the individual stands against the current, exhausting themselves, while the current continues moving regardless. And the irony is that many of the best moments in life happen when force disappears completely. A conversation flows naturally when neither person is trying too hard. Creativity appears when the mind is relaxed rather than strained. Love grows quietly when it is allowed space instead of pressure. Even understanding itself often arrives in moments of stillness rather than struggle, but modern people have become addicted to forcing because they confuse tension with progress. They believe that if they are not constantly struggling, they must be failing. And because of this, they rarely experience the ease that comes from trusting the unfolding of life itself. And there is a rhythm to life that most people never notice because they are too busy trying to outrun it. They move anxiously from one moment to the next, always pushing, always chasing, believing that existence is something to conquer rather than something to participate in. Yet beneath all this noise, life continues unfolding in its own quiet order, untouched by human impatience. And the sun rises without being commanded. The tides arrive without anxiety. Trees do not strain to grow taller, nor do flowers panic about blooming at the correct time. Everything in nature moves according to its own rhythm, and because of this there is harmony. But human beings have separated themselves from this natural flow. We have become obsessed with speed, productivity, and control, and in doing so we have lost the ability to trust the unfolding process of life itself. And you can feel this lack of trust in the way people approach the future. They are constantly worried about what comes next. Even when one problem disappears, another immediately takes its place. The mind races ahead, trying to predict every possible outcome, trying to guarantee safety in a world that has never promised certainty. And because of this, people live with a constant inner tension, as though they are swimming against an invisible current. But life is not a machine that responds perfectly to force and calculation. It is more like music. A melody cannot be rushed without losing its beauty. Imagine listening to a symphony where every note is played in panic, every pause eliminated because the musicians are desperate to reach the end faster. The music would become unbearable. The pauses, the spaces, the gradual unfolding are what create harmony. And human life works the same way. Yet most people are unable to rest in the present because they believe value exists only in the next achievement, the next success, the next destination. They treat life as though it were a ladder rather than a dance, and so they miss the rhythm completely. And the strange thing is that when you begin trusting life's rhythm, many things become clearer. Decisions arise more naturally. Relationships feel less strained. Creativity returns. There is less need to constantly force outcomes because you begin to sense that not everything needs to happen immediately. Some things require waiting. Some things require silence. Some things grow best when left alone. And consider how often clarity comes when you stop searching for it so aggressively. A solution appears during a quiet walk. An idea emerges while sitting peacefully with no intention of finding one. The mind, when relaxed, becomes receptive. But when filled with fear and urgency, it becomes narrow and rigid. And this is why people often feel disconnected from themselves. They are living according to artificial rhythms imposed by society rather than listening to the deeper rhythm within. They rush because everyone else is rushing. They compete because everyone else is competing. But inwardly they feel exhausted because the soul cannot thrive in constant resistance. And trusting the natural rhythm of existence does not mean abandoning responsibility or becoming passive. It means learning when to act and when to allow. It means understanding that not every door must be forced open. Some doors open only when approached without desperation, and there is wisdom in the timing of life that the anxious mind cannot fully understand. Some experiences arrive late because you are not yet ready for them. Some things fall apart because they no longer belong in your path. Some opportunities disappear because another direction is quietly forming beneath the surface. And the more deeply you trust this unfolding, the less frightened you become by uncertainty, because you begin to realize that life has been carrying you all along, and most people have never been taught the difference between action and struggle. To them, the two seem identical. They believe that to accomplish anything meaningful, life must feel heavy, tense, and exhausting. If there is no strain, they assume they are not trying hard enough. And so they move through the world carrying an enormous burden of unnecessary effort, confusing inner conflict with genuine movement. But action and struggle are not the same thing at all. Action is natural, struggle is resistance. Action flows from clarity, while struggle comes from fear. One arises effortlessly from understanding the moment, and the other is created by the mind fighting against reality. And imagine a skilled dancer moving across a stage. Their movements appear effortless, almost weightless. Yet tremendous action is taking place. Muscles are working, balance is shifting, awareness is completely alive. But there is no visible strain because the dancer is not resisting the movement. They have surrendered to it. Now compare this to a person learning to dance for the first time, stiff with self-consciousness, trying desperately not to make mistakes. Every movement becomes awkward because they are forcing themselves instead of flowing with the rhythm. And life often feels awkward for the same reason. People are so afraid of failure, rejection, and uncertainty that every action becomes tense. They overthink every conversation, every decision, every possibility. The mind tightens around life like a fist around water, and the harder it grips, the more uncomfortable everything becomes. And struggle is born from the illusion that life should always go according to personal plans. When reality moves differently, the mind resists. It says this should not be happening, and from that resistance comes suffering, yet action does not require this resistance. Action simply responds to what is here, and a sailor cannot control the wind. If they try to fight it directly, they will exhaust themselves. But the skilled sailor adjusts the sails and moves with the wind instead of against it. This is intelligent action. It is flexible, responsive, alive. Struggle, on the other hand, is rigid. It demands that reality obey fixed expectations. And you can see the difference clearly in creative work. A writer forcing ideas onto the page often produces lifeless words because the mind is strained. But when inspiration flows naturally, writing becomes almost effortless. The words seem to arrive by themselves. The same is true for musicians, painters, athletes, and even ordinary conversations. The best moments happen when self-conscious struggle disappears. And yet, society glorifies struggle endlessly. People boast about stress as though it proves importance. They wear exhaustion like a badge of honor. There is this strange belief that if something feels easy or joyful, it cannot possibly be valuable. But nature does not operate through unnecessary struggle. Birds fly without self-hatred. Rivers flow without anxiety. The stars burn without ambition. And this does not mean life contains no difficulty. Challenges exist. Pain exists. Effort exists. But there is a profound difference between effort that comes naturally and struggle created psychologically. Carrying a heavy stone uphill requires physical effort, but the mental suffering comes from resisting the fact that the hill exists at all. And many people create extra suffering by fighting every experience internally. They resist aging, resist change, resist uncertainty, resist endings. They spend enormous energy wishing reality were different instead of responding intelligently to what is actually happening. And because of this constant resistance, even simple tasks begin to feel overwhelming. And action becomes powerful when it is free from this inner conflict. Then the mind is no longer divided against itself. There is no wasted energy in fear, hesitation, or self-judgment. There is simply movement arising naturally from awareness, like water finding its path downhill without struggle or force, and human beings cling to control because they are frightened. Beneath nearly every attempt to dominate life, there is fear hiding quietly in the background. Fear of uncertainty, fear of loss, fear of failure, fear of being hurt. And because the future is unknown, the mind desperately tries to create stability by controlling every possible outcome. It wants guarantees, it wants certainty, it wants life to behave according to its expectations, but life has never agreed to such arrangements. And the strange thing is that people often believe control brings peace, when in reality it usually creates tension. The more tightly you try to hold everything together, the more anxious you become. You begin watching every detail obsessively, worrying constantly about what might go wrong. And slowly, instead of living life, you become a guard standing nervously at the gates of an imaginary fortress. And you can see this clearly in relationships. When someone fears abandonment, they may try to control the other person's behavior. They become possessive, demanding reassurance, trying to prevent change. But the tighter they hold on, the more suffocated the relationship becomes. Love cannot breathe under control. Genuine connection requires space, trust, and freedom, and the same thing happens with success. People become obsessed with controlling every step of their future. They plan endlessly, compare themselves constantly, panic whenever life moves unexpectedly. Yet despite all this effort, uncertainty remains. No amount of worrying can guarantee tomorrow. No amount of control can prevent change from arriving. And this is what frightens the mind most of all, the realization that life is fundamentally unpredictable. Everything changes, bodies age, seasons pass, people leave, circumstances shift. Even the person you are today is not the same person you were years ago. Existence itself is movement, but instead of flowing with this movement, most people resist it. They cling to fixed identities, fixed expectations, fixed ideas about how life should unfold. And because reality refuses to stay frozen, they suffer. It is like trying to hold the wind still with your hands. And fear always seeks control because fear believes uncertainty is dangerous. Yet uncertainty is also where life's beauty exists. If everything were completely predictable, life would lose its mystery entirely. There would be no discovery, no surprise, no wonder. The unknown is not only the source of anxiety, it is also the source of possibility. And think of how much energy people waste trying to protect themselves from experiences that have not even happened. They rehearse conversations in their minds, imagine disasters, replay mistakes endlessly. The body becomes tense, the mind exhausted. But all this effort changes very little. Life continues unfolding beyond the limits of personal control. And letting go of control does not mean becoming careless or irresponsible. It means recognizing the difference between what can be guided and what cannot. You can plant a seed, water it, and care for it, but you cannot force it to grow overnight. Growth happens according to its own timing. And there is tremendous freedom in realizing that you do not have to manage every detail of existence. The heart beats without your command. Breath moves naturally in and out. The earth spins silently through space without your supervision. Life has been unfolding long before your plans appeared, and it will continue long after your worries disappear. And when fear loosens its grip, something remarkable happens. The mind becomes lighter. You begin responding to life instead of defending yourself against it constantly. There is less panic about the future because you are no longer demanding certainty from an uncertain world. And in that surrender, life often becomes far more graceful than anything the fearful mind could have controlled on its own. And one of the deepest sources of human suffering is the refusal to accept change. People want life to remain stable, predictable, and familiar. They cling to moments, relationships, identities, and circumstances as though holding tightly could stop time itself. But life is movement. Everything changes continuously, whether we cooperate with it or not. The seasons shift, the body ages, emotions rise and fall, people enter and leave our lives. Change is not something happening occasionally to existence. Change is existence, and yet the human mind resists this reality constantly. It says this should stay the way it is. It wants permanence in a world built upon transformation. And because of this resistance, people create immense inner conflict. They fight against endings, against uncertainty, against the natural unfolding of events. They try to freeze the river while still expecting it to flow, and you can see this clearly when a chapter of life ends. Perhaps a relationship fades, a career changes, or a dream no longer feels alive. Instead of allowing the transition naturally, many people hold on desperately. They replay memories, resist reality, and exhaust themselves trying to restore what has already moved on. But clinging to the past is like trying to keep autumn leaves attached to the tree forever. The tighter the grip, the greater the suffering. And nature understands something that human beings often forget. A tree does not mourn when its leaves fall. It does not panic during winter, fearing that spring will never return. It allows each season to come and go because it trusts the cycle of life. But people resist their inner winters. They fear emptiness, silence, and uncertainty, so they constantly struggle against change instead of moving with it. And this resistance comes largely from fear of the unknown. The familiar feels safe, even when it no longer brings joy. The mind prefers predictable discomfort over uncertain possibility. So people stay trapped in situations that no longer nourish them simply because change feels frightening. But life cannot grow where movement is denied, and a river remains alive because it flows. If water becomes trapped and stagnant, it begins to decay. Human beings are no different. When they refuse change, they become emotionally rigid. Their energy grows heavy because they are fighting the very current of existence. And flowing with change does not mean liking every change that occurs. Painful experiences still hurt. Loss still brings sadness, but there is a difference between feeling pain and resisting reality. When you resist change, you add psychological suffering to natural pain. You not only experience loss, but also continuously argue with the fact that the loss happened at all. And the wise person learns to adapt instead of resist. Like a skilled surfer riding a wave, they understand that balance comes not from controlling the ocean, but from moving with its motion. They remain flexible, responsive, open to what each moment brings. And strangely enough, when you stop fighting change, life becomes less frightening. You begin to realize that you have survived countless transformations already. The person you were 10 years ago no longer exists in the same form, yet life continued. Difficult moments passed, unexpected opportunities appeared, new understandings emerged, and change often carries hidden intelligence within it. Some endings clear space for new beginnings that could never have arrived otherwise. Some disappointments redirect life toward deeper growth. But these possibilities remain invisible when the mind is obsessed with clinging to what was. And there is a profound peace that comes from understanding that life was never meant to stand still. Everything is dancing, shifting, dissolving, and becoming. And when you stop demanding permanence from a changing world, you begin to move with existence itself instead of exhausting yourself fighting against its flow. And most people spend very little time in the present moment. Physically, they may be here, sitting in a room, walking down a street, drinking a cup of tea, but psychologically, they are somewhere else entirely. The mind is wandering through memories of the past or anxieties about the future. It replays old conversations, regrets mistakes, imagines disasters, plans endlessly for tomorrow. And because of this constant mental movement, people rarely experience the simple peace that exists in being fully alive now. And the strange thing is that life only ever happens in the present. The past exists as memory, and the future exists as imagination, but this moment is the only reality directly available to you. Yet the mind treats the present as though it were merely a waiting room for something more important. People say, "I will finally relax when I achieve this," or "I will be happy once life becomes different." And so they postpone peace indefinitely, always placing fulfillment somewhere ahead of themselves. But the future never actually arrives in the way the mind expects. When tomorrow comes, it is experienced again as another present moment. And if a person has never learned to be at peace now, no future circumstance will magically solve that restlessness. And you can see how deeply this affects everyday life. A person eats a meal while thinking about work. They spend time with loved ones while distracted by worries. They walk through beautiful mornings without ever truly noticing the sky, the breeze, or the sound of birds because the mind is too occupied with mental noise. Life slips past unnoticed while attention remains trapped inside thought, and the mind believes constant thinking is necessary for survival, but much of it is repetitive and unnecessary. It circles around the same fears, the same desires, the same imagined problems, and this endless mental activity creates tension within the body. Shoulders tighten, breathing becomes shallow, and the nervous system remains restless because the mind is always somewhere other than here. And finding peace in the present moment does not mean erasing all thoughts or becoming emotionally numb. It means no longer being completely possessed by mental noise. Thoughts may still arise, but they no longer dominate awareness entirely. There is space around them, and imagine sitting beside a river watching leaves float downstream. You can observe each leaf without needing to jump into the water and chase it. Thoughts can be experienced the same way. They come and go naturally when you stop clinging to them. And the present moment itself is surprisingly simple. It is the mind that complicates it. Right now, in immediate experience, there may simply be breathing, sounds, sensations, light entering the eyes. But the mind overlays endless commentary onto reality. It labels, judges, compares, worries, and resists. And through this constant interpretation, people lose direct contact with life itself. And children often experience the present more naturally because they have not yet become trapped inside excessive psychological time. They can become completely absorbed in a single moment, fascinated by rain falling on a window or sunlight moving across the floor. But adults lose this capacity because they become consumed by ambition, regret, and endless mental occupation. And there is a profound stillness available when attention returns fully to the present. Not because external problems disappear, but because the mind temporarily stops dragging the weight of yesterday and tomorrow into this moment. In that stillness, even ordinary things begin to feel alive again. A cup of tea becomes enough. The sound of wind through trees becomes beautiful. Silence no longer feels empty, and beneath all the noise of thought, there is a quiet sense that this moment, exactly as it is, has already been enough all along.